Another term I could use in regards to our conversation that we've already had is to experience enoughness. If you've ever heard that term before, experience enoughness. And one of the ways of doing that is to reconnect to nature. And what I'm trying to do, and I think successfully, is to get folks to start looking at the sky.
Welcome to Facing Future. Our automotive age has brought unprecedented mobility at a steep cost. From extraction to tailpipe emissions, gas cars are an environmental disaster. To accommodate the car, whole ecosystems have been lost as paved surfaces from parking lots to highways cover soil and absorb heat. EVs will not change that. Add to that the 3/4 of arable land converted to animal agriculture, and we have a recipe for the disaster that is upon us. As weather patterns change, bring stronger storms, droughts, we need to free more land to absorb flooding, recover hydrology, and enhance natural systems to sequester CO2. My guests today study how weather patterns are changing and what we need to do to adapt to our changing climate. Bill Selby is an emeritus professor at Santa Monica College in LA. He helped establish SMC's Center for Environmental and Urban Studies and is the author of the upcoming book, California Skywatcher. Paul Beckwith is a climate system scientist and part-time professor of climatology, meteorology, and oceanography at the University of Ottawa and Carleton University. Bill, what can you tell us about our changing world?
Well, that's quite a question. Let me start out, since the question was so general, with a general formula that kind of, I think, summarizes our situation today. We can pretty much identify what human impacts are by organizing them in the three different sort of spheres. One is population. Obviously, the more people we have on the planet, the more impact there will be to our natural systems. Take population and multiply that times affluence. The most affluent people on the planet tend to make the greatest impacts as well, for obvious reasons. We have the greatest amount of resources, and we use the greatest amount of natural resources. So the third thing that we can sort of identify as the culprit here is the technology. So if we multiply population times affluence times technology, we can see that, for instance, affluence doesn't have to be a bad thing. There are a lot of affluent people who have figured out ways of living on the planet to be less impactful or more positively impactful. But technology is a big one because everybody can figure this out. We can use our technologies to destroy or to build. We can use our technologies in positive or negative ways. We do this every day in our everyday lives. So by using that formula, our human impact is equal to population times affluence times technology. We can get a pretty good idea of what the overall problems are that you're trying to focus on in your programs as well.
Well, we started looking at the car, and the car, people think of just emissions and pollution, but the land use is so critical. What we've done to cover over our earth with all of this asphalt and so forth, combined with the animal agriculture problem, which has wasted a lot of land, we don't have the ecosystems that we need in order for our climate to balance itself. Paul, you study a lot about climate systems. What's the most important thing we would need to do to establish some kind of adaptation that will help us?
The most alarming and obvious thing is the accelerating increase of fossil fuel emissions from burning fossil fuels for energy. Talking about coal and oil and natural gas, and growth is still on a record tear around the world. The people are consuming more than I think the number is 102 or 103 million barrels a day of oil. Record high levels. Canada is just bringing a pipeline called the Trans Mountain Pipeline on stream probably later this year. So output from Canada is going to hit further record levels over the next couple of years. We're just heading in the wrong direction. Big banks are pouring huge amounts of money into the industry. We're just, governments are talking about caps and reductions, but the reality on the ground is that's not happening. So that's the biggest factor. So that's driven us into a pretty desperate state, I would say. People are seeing something happen, something broke in the climate in 2023, 2024. Simultaneously, all of the factors, all the climate variables are going the wrong direction. Greenhouse gases are rising at record rates. Ocean temperatures are enormously high. Global rates of global temperature rise are 50 or 100% higher. There's something called the Earth energy imbalance, which is just setting new records in the last few decades. So it's all coming to a head. So it's going to necessitate carbon removal from the atmosphere ocean system, and also probably, I'm convinced, solar radiation management techniques to try to cool the planet a bit, to buy us time to slash emissions. So if we were smart, we would get we would convert the U.S. military budget and military budget of countries around the world for a few years and put all that money and expertise, scientific knowledge, engineers that are working in that field, and get them to address climate with all of the three things that I've said, the slashing fossil fuels, carbon capture, methane capture, and also solar radiation management, things like marine cloud brightening, plankton pasture restoration. I'm a big advocate of those sort of things because we are in extremely dire straits. And they need to
California has always been sort of in the forefront of all kinds of innovations. And Bill, I guess you've been in the middle of a lot of that. What's going on in California that is happening now?
Yeah, it's a good point. And all of the things that Paul said are very important, and the focus on climate change is important. But I also want to emphasize, and you started this, Dale, with the discussion of cars. I also want to emphasize how so many other environmental pressures are a part of this formula that I mentioned before. And examples are habitat destruction, pollution, species extinction, invasive species that are crowding out many of our natives. In California, we've already gone through this, where we paved so much of our surfaces in the cities, and we suffered the consequences of pavement everywhere. Donating or dedicating our land surfaces to the car has consequences. At the same time that we doubled the number of cars and they doubled the number of people in California over a few decades, we cut the amount of smog in our state in half. A lot of people don't know that Los Angeles smog was twice as bad in the 1960s as it is today. And we did that by using our technologies, by making our cars much cleaner. So there are success stories out there too. I mean, the ozone problem that we have still, but it was much more serious a few decades ago when we realized that CFCs and other gases that we were producing were destroying the ozone in the stratosphere. So we've attacked that problem. We've worked with countries all over the world, every country pretty much all over the world, to address that problem, just as we here in Los Angeles area and in California have addressed our pollution problem from cars. So it's not all bad news. We've proven that we can solve these problems if we decide to do so. Let me just throw out another statistic now that I've tried to be a little bit positive too. And going back to some of the things that Paul was trying to emphasize, the average American uses approximately 25 acres of productive earth surface every year in resources. If everyone in the world lived as we do, it would take nearly 5 Earths of natural resources to support them. So that's not going to happen.
We are the ones who are causing this problem in the world. It's not just that there are too many people, it's there's too much consumption by the people who live in this affluent part of the world. So buy a small car if you must have a car, or better yet, take a train more of the time and drive less and fly less, less for us, because we need to, help the other people in the world who are already having famines and floods and droughts of a massive scale.
Yeah, could I piggyback on that too and just support what you're saying? A lot of folks think, well, this is all about sacrifice and getting into a dark corner and turning off the lights. And I don't believe that. I think that a lot of those changes you're talking about, and this would require a paradigm shift, are going to improve the quality of our lives. There's a lot of ways we can all of your viewers can think of ways that they can improve the quality of their lives by not being such hyper consumers. In other words, why are there so many millions of people going into deep debt, buying things that they really don't need and aren't making them happy? Let's start focusing on those things that make us happy, that provide long-term stability and pleasure in our lives. And most of those aren't part of the hyper-consumer world that we have been sold. So I think that your point about over-consuming is really important, not only from an environmental standpoint, but from a personal viewpoint, where do we want to live better lives? Do we want to have better communities? Do we want to have better homes? And a lot of that means that we need to rethink how we live our lives and be more efficient in the way we live our lives, and find out ways to enjoy life that might be quite different from the bill of goods we've been sold in the past.
Yeah, I'm reminded of this cartoon. This old man is standing in front of a garage that's packed to the ceiling with stuff, and the door's open in the garage, and his son is standing next to him, and he says, "Son, one day this will all be yours." Right? A packed full garage. I spoke with Bill McGibbon a few weeks ago about Third Act. So he founded 350.org many years ago, and he's kind of stepped away because part of his what he really likes doing is starting new stuff and seeing it grow. So 350.org done that. Other people are carrying it nicely. So he started Third Act, and his comments are, there's over 70 million Americans over the age of 60, and there's like 10, 15, 20,000 people joining this group of people every day. And they have the bulk of the money, the bulk of the power in the country, in any country for that matter. And there's no known mechanism to stop these people from voting. Mm-hmm. Right. So these are all the things. So this is a group of people that, if they change and they force government to address the problem, I think we're going to start seeing some big headway. Mainstream news outlets like USA Today and Reuters and some other very, very mainstream news reporting groups are writing articles about marine cloud brightening and plankton restoration. They're actually sounding very radical all of a sudden. What they would have called radical for decades, they're actually talking about, because they're saying we need to do something quickly to try to restore some sort of balance in the climate system.
Absolutely. Well, you're both climate scientists, and we've talked about, societal change, which is certainly necessary. But I wonder, Bill, could you talk a little bit about, nature's palette? It has all kinds of capacities that, we should be more aware. We're not paying attention to nature. And your latest book, Skywatcher, let's look at the sky. We've lost sight of the stars, which used to be visible. Now you can see 2, 3 stars. There used to be thousands of stars available to see. Because of our light pollution, we can't see it anymore, and our pollution in general. We've lost our connection to, nature. Here it is. It's not with us anymore. But nature has incredible power. can do amazing things. We think we can save our planet. Well, the planet is immensely more powerful than we are. What kinds of things are in nature's toolbox?
Another term I could use in regards to our conversation that we've already had is to experience enoughness. If you've ever heard that term before, experience enoughness. And one of the ways of doing that is to reconnect to nature. And what I'm trying to do, and I think successfully, is to get folks to start looking at the sky. Now, Paul, I kind of disagree with you. I think folks that live in the city can reconnect to nature without even going to a national park or a wild area. By simply looking up in the sky, you can see some of the experiments. I'm trying to get people to start looking at the clouds and to look at their weather patterns and to see how they're changing. And I do that in my book. And then I bring them down to earth to show them how ecosystems are changing all around them. And here's an example. You know, we've had climate change since there's been Earth. Millions of years of climate change. Now, most of this is pretty slow. It occurs over thousands of years. They involve Milankovitch cycles and other natural cycles that are constantly changing our climates. But when we look at that background climate change, it does appear, and we've seen this in the last few decades, that if we just look at the natural changes, we were going into a cooler period in Earth history. Of course, just the opposite has happened. We're over a degree Celsius warmer, and we continue to warm at accelerating rates. And this is why we know that most of this change is happening because of humans. Here in California is a perfect example. Many of our pine forests during the great mega drought that occurred from about 2000 to about 22 years beyond that until we've had our recent floods, many of those drought years have killed off millions of trees. Literally, acres and acres of forests have been lost in California by that mega drought. And so those trees, those pine trees, have been replaced by oak woodlands. Our oak woodlands are often being replaced with grasslands. So you can see a transition from wetter plant communities to drier plant communities. And that's not always because of just drought, but because of increasing temperatures. Those increasing temperatures pull a lot of water out of the soil. And it increases the evapotranspiration rates on Earth's surface. And that means that our summer soils are getting much drier. And many of our plants that could withstand the drought in the past are not making it through those dry summers. So we can see that there are these natural cycles that our plants and animals have adapted to, and us humans too. And then on top of that, unfortunately, are these human-induced changes that are much more extreme. And I think Paul might have mentioned this in previously, but one of the things that we've noticed here in California and throughout the world, but particularly here on the West Coast, is that our jet stream patterns are changing. Most of you know that the Arctic is warming up a lot faster than most of the rest of the globe. And this is changing jet stream patterns so that we have these very high amplitude loops, or what are called Rossby waves, in the upper level circulation systems. They're the ones that guide storms and high and low pressure systems and fair and stormy weather. Anyway, those giant loops are getting more extreme, and they sometimes get stuck in place. And the net result is we get these long periods of drought followed by extreme storms that flood us out one year, and then the drought begins the next year as we get caught under a ridge. So again, all of these are natural cycles, of course, that we start with, but on top of that are these human-induced changes that are the ones that we're trying to address here.
Well, you sent me some interesting footage of storms, how powerful a storm can be. We tend to forget how powerful nature is. It's quite amazing. We had Superstorm Sandy where I live some years ago. It was a big shock to the East Coast. We didn't think anything like that was going to happen around here. And we haven't really learned from it. People are rebuilding in places that, will probably be hit by another storm, the New Jersey coast, Long Island, all those kinds of places, Staten Island. We have to consider where people are living and whether we really should be moving people into different places. Florida is another example on the East Coast. Paul, of course, you're in Canada.
Yeah, so the excellent points from both of you. I mean, humanity, people have this hubris. I mean, we have developed incredible and amazing technologies, over the last several hundred years, and at an accelerating rate. Even in the last decades, we've gone from stone flint tools to artificial intelligence and spacecraft and amazing computer technology, supercomputers, et cetera. So we have this hubris. We think that we can throw tech at any problem and solve it, but nature has some different ideas. Yes. The famous climate scientist Wally Broecker said that we're poking climate with a stick, and eventually we'll wake up the climate and nature will fight back. I mean, I would say we're not using a stick anymore. Maybe a hockey stick. I would say more like a sledgehammer. The Arctic warming and the jet streams, the loss of sea ice. I mean, this is ongoing and has been a worry to many people for many years, leading to maybe even a blue ocean event and all these tipping points. But there is something I call the mother of all tipping points, which is the ocean circulation patterns, the AMOC and the connecting to the southern hemisphere, the ocean currents. And that's been slowing down significantly. And a very important paper came out just a few days ago, or just recently, and it basically did from the results of the paper show that if the ocean currents hadn't slowed down at all, we would actually have had 30% less sea ice area in the Arctic, and we would have 20% less thickness of the ice than what we have now. Those numbers would have taken us to basically no ice in the Arctic. So what's kept the Arctic, the ice in the Arctic in the last number of decades is actually the slowing ocean currents, the slowing AMOC. And people are worried we'll cross the threshold and then the AMOC will shut off. And then forget about a blue ocean event. The Arctic's going to go into a deep freeze again. The tropics will take up a lot of the extra heat, the southern hemisphere. The temperature gradient between the Arctic and the tropics will get really large again. That will increase the strength of the jet streams. We'll lose some of the waviness and they'll become zonal. And we might have fewer extreme weather events in the northern hemisphere, but the tropics and southern hemisphere will just like bake, basically. So there's a lot of wrenches in the climate system. There's a lot of things that nature can throw at us that, we're trying to understand. And, there's lots of papers written, lots of research, but, it's not a given that we're going to be able to figure out what's going to happen before it happens. So the climate and nature is so full of surprises. We need to set aside some of our hubris and be more in awe of nature and what it can throw at us. And the term I really hate is, the term climate scientists say, oh, it's happening faster than expected. I mean, it just means that our expectations are completely wrong, like most of the time, right? To have that statement. If you Google climate changing slower than expected, it's kind of difficult to find anything. Whereas faster than expected is like pages and pages of hits. It's like so this should tell us something. And also, human psychology and human nature and being in touch with nature, I think is very important because we need ways to deal with the stress from our changing ecosystems and climate. I mean, the stress is nowhere more acute than in northern Canada, for example, in First Nations lands, isolated communities, because their way of life is completely changing, right? The way they get food, the way they hunt and trap and fish and all the rest. And, the remote areas, so isolation is even more acute, and we need ways to deal with this, psychologically, like climate anxiety, eco-anxiety, all of those things are getting worse and worse. If you talk to psychologists and psychiatric, doctors to help people, I mean, I'm sure that climate anxiety is one of the biggest things on their list now for their patients that they see.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. You had asked Dale about extreme weather events, and I wanted to mention the importance of water vapor, and this also supports what Paul was saying. When the ocean temperatures rise, which they are and have, the water evaporates more rapidly into air now that is warmer than it was before, and warmer air has a higher capacity to hold water vapor. So the atmosphere has more water vapor in it now than it did 100 years ago. And these are positive feedbacks. And what this means is that the more water vapor we have in our atmosphere that's coming from those warmer oceans and the warmer air can hold it is now a greenhouse gas, because water vapor is a greenhouse gas. And this also means that we have more latent heat of evaporation that's stored in our atmosphere. And those more powerful storms are running on that latent heat. Anytime you've seen a thunderstorm, a tornado, or a hurricane, all of those storms are running off the latent heat that's given off when that water vapor changes into liquid water and then ice. And that energy is being distributed by nature in our atmosphere. And one other thing about this, and getting back to our discussion about connecting to nature, there's a term called nature deficit disorder that you've probably heard on your programs before, and it's real. This is not something, this is really serious business where people are suffering from depression and anxiety because they're not in touch with nature. It's in our DNA, and we need to make those connections once again.
Yeah, and just the language is important. So, the scientific community talks about feedbacks as positive feedbacks and negative feedbacks. For their actual impact on us, the negative ones are good, the positive ones are bad. The positive ones are accelerating feedbacks. They're making they're vicious feedbacks, vicious cycles. The negative ones are like braking feedbacks, equilibrium inducing feedbacks, right? Just the language, sometimes English is not so great because we can get the wrong impression from the language we use, especially scientific terminology.
Thank you. Another example of that, what a great conversation, by the way. Another example of that is here in the western states, in general, the snow levels are a little bit higher than they used to be during storms. Now, this isn't always the case. We still get really extreme snowstorms, but here's what's going on. When the snow levels are higher, there's less surface that's covered with white. And that white surface reflects solar radiation very efficiently. Now, if we have a dark surface that doesn't have snow on it, it absorbs radiation and gets warmer. And so that would be an example of what we call positive feedback. And like Paul was saying, we don't mean it's a positive thing for us. We mean that it's enhanced the global warming or the local warming that's been going on already. And another good example of that is getting back to what Dale wanted to talk about during this program too, is our paving of surfaces. This causes, of course, that urban heat island to get even more extreme. And so in our cities, on top of the general global warming that we're having on the planet, we're also having more extreme heating in our urban heat islands, which more than doubles that global warming effect. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out. The problems that we have sometimes with the terminology and
the devil's always in the details. So that snowpack you're talking about, that's like a battery for water.
That's right.
So when we have a snowpack up there and it melts out in the summer, it feeds all the rivers and stuff. If the snowpack is really low, the rivers can just dry up. So there's all of these interconnections between every element. People need to, and it's kind of fun to try to think of the interconnections between them because, it's like a puzzle really that we're trying to figure out.
Yeah, perfect example. Our floods are quicker and more extreme now because so much more of the precipitation is falling as rain and very quickly. And our summers are much drier because the water's already run off either in the reservoirs or in the ocean. And this is compounding the problem.
Right. And we just have to work with nature because we have to recognize these things and say, okay, well, when there's an extreme rain event, let's capture this water, not just let it run off. So let's get it in the reservoirs and use it, right? Use it to our advantage. Like, so just change the way we think about and do things.
We have to understand water, the hydrological cycles of the world. And as the glaciers melt, it would be a really great idea to save some of that water before we don't have glaciers anymore that will provide, that need to provide people in the Himalayas and in Southern Europe with water. Hydrology is so important. Anyway, thank you both for being on Facing Future today. This has been a really interesting and fun conversation. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for asking me.
It's great.
Yeah.